For over 100 years, dozens of German companies produced this style of pocket knife. They came in different shapes and sizes, but they all shared many of the same basic features. Today, very little is known about their history. Over the past several years, I've been collecting these knives and learning more about the people and companies that made them. Along the way, I've found old catalogs, advertisements, and surviving knives that have helped piece together part of their history. Here's what I've learned. I never set out to collect these knives. When I bought this one, I had no idea that companies other than Otter had made this style of knife. As far as I knew, this was simply an Otter Messer pocket knife. I never imagined it would become the starting point of years of collecting and research. I've been fortunate enough to call Munich home for the past several years. It's an incredible city with so much history, and living here has given me a unique opportunity to collect vintage German pocket knives. Before long, one knife turned into two, and two turned into a collection. I'm Joe from SRHQ. Over the past several years, I've built a collection of traditional German rivet knives. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the examples I've been able to collect. A few months after buying the Otter, I came across this vintage Robert Class at the Olympic Park flea market here in Munich. My first thought was, wow, it looks just like my Otter. The only obvious difference was that this one had 2 decorative rivets instead of 3. What caught my attention wasn't that it looked exactly like the Otter. It didn't. The bolsters were different, it only had 2 rivets instead of 3, and it was made by a completely different company. But it was close enough that I couldn't ignore it. The dark wood handles, the brass rivets, the overall shape, I felt like these knives had to be related somehow. At that point, I had the Otter and what I believed to be a vintage Robert Class. What I wanted to know was simple: had any other companies made knives like these? Then I found another, a vintage Karl Linder 3 rivet. After that, I found a vintage Friedrich Herder, this time with an electrician's blade. Then I found another Robert Class, but this one was different. It had 3 rivets instead of 2, it lacked the threaded bolster of the first example, and it was noticeably larger. Before long, I had more questions than answers. The more examples I found, the more questions I had, so I started looking for answers. I learned that Otter Messer and Robert Class were still producing modern versions of the knife, but when it came to the history of the pattern, the trail quickly went cold. Despite being made by multiple Solingen companies, there seems to be almost no information available. No clear history, no timeline, and no explanation for where the pattern came from. No matter where I looked, I kept running into dead ends. With no clear answers to be found, I turned to messerforum.net, Germany's largest knife forum. To my surprise, there was almost no discussion of these knives there either. So in 2022, I started a thread dedicated to the German rivet knives. I'll leave a link to that thread in the description below. Before long, other collectors began sharing photos, examples, and information that I hadn't been able to find anywhere else. Some of these posts would eventually send me down research paths I never expected. The forum thread renewed my interest in collecting these knives, and before long I found myself actively searching for more examples. I visited flea markets, antique stores, I searched online listings, and whenever I came across a knife that looked related, I wanted to learn more about it. The collection began to grow. What started with just a few examples soon expanded to include knives from Hartkopf & Co., Christians, Herder, Otter, and several other Solingen makers. Along the way, I even started finding clip point versions that looked closely related to the spear point knives I had been collecting. As I compared them side by side, I began noticing the same features appearing again and again. Wooden handles, decorative rivets on the front side only, similar bolster styles, similar construction techniques. There was a clear relationship between these knives. The more examples I found, the more interested I became in their history. One of the most interesting discoveries to come from the forum thread was an old Friedrich Herder advertisement featuring a rivet knife unlike any I had seen before. The headline mentions the soldier, the farmer, and the worker, making it clear who these knives were intended for. The illustration even shows a German World War II soldier using the knife while cutting a loaf of bread. The knife in the advertisement featured 3 distinct spade rivets. A few years later, I was able to find an example of my own. My knife features 3 aluminum spade rivets and no brass anywhere in its construction. I also found a second variant featuring 2 brass spade rivets. While I have seen a handful of 2-spade examples over the years, I have never encountered another 3-spade example. Over the next few years, I continued searching. The collection grew and new examples continued to surface. But while I was learning more about the knives themselves, their history remained frustratingly difficult to trace. I still didn't know how old the pattern was or how far back the earliest examples could be documented. Eventually, I realized I would have to go to the source. By 2026, the collection had expanded significantly. But despite years of research, I was no longer finding new information about these knives. So in June of 2026, I traveled to Solingen, Germany, hoping to learn more about the history of the German rivet knives. Over the next 3 days, I immersed myself in Solingen's knife-making history, visiting archives and museums throughout the city. I examined dozens of catalogs, pattern books, advertisements, and trade documents searching for information on rivet knives and sport messers. For those interested in the trip itself, I documented the experience in a previous video. One of the most important discoveries made during this trip was the sheer variety of these knives. As I worked through the catalogs, advertisements, and pattern books, I found examples with different handle shapes, blade shapes, sizes, and configurations. By the end of the trip, it had become clear that the rivet knives were not a single pattern, but what I now consider a family of related work knives. From what I've been able to find out, these knives came mostly in 3 distinct frame shapes, with the occasional exception. Certain blade shapes were typically associated with a specific frame, though there were exceptions to that rule as well. Each frame shape was produced in a variety of sizes. Because I couldn't find any historical classification system or official names for these patterns, I've simply referred to them by the blade shapes most commonly found on each frame: the spear point frame, the clip point frame, and the sheep's foot or hawkbill pruner frame. Despite the many variations, these knives shared a number of common characteristics. All featured wooden handles, decorative rivets, either 2 or 3 on the mark side of the knife only, traditional slip joint construction, and similar bolsters, including smooth, threaded, and decorative Kullen-style bolsters. Above all, these were simple, no-nonsense work knives built for everyday use. The spear point frame is the most common of the family and possibly the most popular since it's the only version still produced today. It's an elongated, bare-headed swell-end frame, slimmer at the bolster and widening towards the rounded butt. As the name implies, it's typically paired with a spear point blade. These knives have wooden handles with 2 or 3 decorative rivets on the front side only, usually brass, steel, or nickel silver. I've also observed 2-bladed examples. Handle sizes range from about 10 centimeters to 12.5 centimeters, with smooth, threaded, or decorative Kullen-style bolsters. Here are a few variations on this frame shape: 3 clip point examples and 2 electrician's blades, all made by Friedrich Herder. What I'm calling the clip point frame has a slender, slightly curved handle that starts narrower at the bolster and widens towards the bare-headed butt. It loosely resembles an American trapper or slimline trapper frame. These knives are definitely harder to find and considerably rarer than their spear point counterparts. Most have wooden handles, although inexpensive plastic shell versions also exist, like this glitter gold example. I've observed them with either 2 or 3 decorative rivets on the front side only. The bolsters are typically threaded or feature decorative Kullen. I've only encountered single-bladed clip point versions. Handle sizes range from about 10 to 12 centimeters, although most examples are around 11 centimeters. The sheep's foot or hawkbill frame appears to be the rarest of the 3, and unfortunately I haven't been able to find an original example. The 2 shown here are digital recreations based on old catalog entries. I've seen versions with either 2 or 3 decorative rivets as well as threaded and decorative Kullen-style bolsters. 2-bladed versions also existed and they came in various sizes. Based on the overall shape, I can only assume they would have felt similar in hand to modern rope knives or hawkbill pruning knives. Now that we've looked at the 3 main frame shapes, the next question is how far back this family can actually be traced. On a recent research trip to Solingen, I was able to examine a number of original pattern books and catalog entries. In a hand-drawn Friedrich Koch pattern book dated 1859, I found several different knife patterns featuring decorative rivets, which could potentially push the history of this type of knife back to the 1850s. A packet of loose drawings filed under 1884 also contains several interesting examples, but the pages appear to have been added at different times, making those particular drawings impossible to date with certainty. The first real smoking gun examples I found appear in the 1880s Peter Hendricks pattern book. Two spear point rivet knives remarkably similar to the versions still produced today, as well as the sheep's foot example. Similar knives appear from the Christian Brothers in the 1890s, and by 1900 the design was already well established across several Solingen makers, including Hamasfar and Heinrich Kaufmann. So while the broader idea may reach back to the 1850s, the clearest evidence I've been able to find for this recognizable knife family begins in the 1880s. There may still be earlier examples or other variations I simply haven't found yet. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my video on the German rivet knives. If you have anything to contribute to the conversation, or if you simply want to continue seeing content like this, don't forget to leave me a comment. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks again. Have a great day.